My wife demanded a DNA test to prove our baby was mine. The results exposed her secret instead. I was holding my 3-month-old daughter when my wife told me she wanted a paternity test. Not asked. Demanded. Standing in our kitchen at 8:30 on a Wednesday morning, still wearing her yoga pants and that oversized Northwestern sweatshirt I'd bought her for Christmas, Melissa looked me dead in the eye and said the baby might not be mine. The words came out flat, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing in the mirror. Our daughter Lily was sleeping against my chest, her tiny fist curled around my thumb, and I remember thinking how insane it was that I could feel her heartbeat through her onesie, while my wife was essentially accusing me of being too stupid to notice she'd cheated. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't process what was happening. The laugh came out strangled, confused, and Melissa's face hardened into something I didn't recognize. "I'm serious, Nathan," she said. "I need to know for sure." That's when I realized she wasn't joking. That's when everything I thought I knew started crumbling. I'd been married to Melissa for 5 years when Lily was born. We met in college, both of us studying business at Northwestern, and fell into that easy kind of love where everything just worked. She was driven, organized, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I was the steady one, the problem solver, the guy who could fix anything from a broken dishwasher to a complicated client relationship. We complemented each other perfectly, or so I thought. After graduation, we both landed good jobs in Chicago. I went into commercial real estate development. She became a marketing director at a pharmaceutical company. We bought a 3-bedroom house in Evanston, adopted a golden retriever named Copper, started talking about kids. The pregnancy was planned, celebrated, documented in a leather-bound journal Melissa kept on her nightstand. She'd been meticulous about everything: prenatal vitamins, doctor appointments, nursery color schemes. I'd spent 3 weekends building the crib from scratch, sanding every edge smooth enough that it wouldn't scratch Lily's perfect skin. When she was born on a freezing January morning, I cut the umbilical cord with hands that shook so badly the nurse had to guide me. Lily had my dark hair, Melissa's nose, and eyes that seemed to shift between blue and gray depending on the light. She was perfect. We were perfect. Or at least I thought we were. The morning Melissa dropped the paternity test bomb, I'd taken the day off work to help with Lily while Melissa caught up on sleep. She'd been complaining about exhaustion for weeks, which I'd attributed to the hell of newborn sleep schedules. I'd been doing midnight feedings, changing diapers, walking Lily around the house at 3 a.m. while singing off-key lullabies. I'd lost count of how many times I'd fallen asleep sitting up on the couch with my daughter drooling on my shoulder. The idea that Lily wasn't mine had never crossed my mind, not even as a fleeting paranoid thought. She looked like me. She had my widow's peak, the same cowlick that made her hair stick up on the left side. When she gripped my finger, I could see my own hands in miniature. But standing there in our kitchen, watching my wife's face remain cold and certain, I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger yet. Confusion. A creeping sense that I'd missed something crucial, like walking into a room and forgetting why you came. "Where is this coming from?" I asked, keeping my voice steady for Lily's sake. She was still sleeping, oblivious to the detonation happening around her. Melissa crossed her arms, her wedding ring catching the morning sunlight streaming through the window over the sink. "I just need to be sure," she repeated, "for my peace of mind." That phrase, peace of mind, stuck in my throat like a fishbone. What peace of mind? What had I done that made her doubt me? I'd been faithful, devoted, present. I'd held her hair back during morning sickness. I'd assembled 53 baby shower gifts while she napped. I'd cried when they placed Lily in my arms for the first time, so overwhelmed with love I couldn't speak. And now she wanted proof? Proof that I hadn't somehow tricked her into raising another man's child? The logic didn't track. If anyone should be demanding a paternity test, it should be me, but even thinking that felt absurd. Lily was mine. I knew it in my bones. "Melissa, this doesn't make sense," I said carefully, shifting Lily slightly so I could see my wife's face better. "What happened? Did someone say something?" Her jaw tightened. "No one said anything. I just need to know." The repetition was starting to feel scripted, like she'd prepared for this conversation and refused to deviate from her talking points. I tried a different approach. "Okay, but why now? Lily's 3 months old. If you had doubts, why didn't you bring this up when she was born?" Melissa looked away, staring at the coffee maker like it held answers. "I've been thinking about it for a while. I can't stop thinking about it." Her voice cracked slightly, the first hint of emotion. "Every time I look at her, I wonder. I need to know for sure, Nathan. Please." The please sounded genuine, almost desperate, and that's what made me agree. Not because I had any doubts, but because I couldn't understand why my wife was torturing herself like this, and if a simple test would end her suffering, then fine. We'd do the damn test. I called our pediatrician, Dr. Lawrence Chen, that afternoon. He'd been Lily's doctor since birth, a calm, measured man in his 50s who'd walked us through every milestone and anxiety with patient expertise. When I explained what we needed, there was a long pause on the line. "Nathan," he said slowly, "paternity testing isn't typically something I handle in my practice, but I can refer you to a lab. May I ask what prompted this?" I could hear the question beneath the question. "Is everything okay at home?" Melissa wants peace of mind, I said, echoing her phrase because I didn't have a better explanation. Doctor. Chen was quiet for a moment. I see. Well, the process is straightforward. Cheek swabs from you, Melissa, and Lily. Results usually take about a week. I'll email you the information for a reputable lab. He paused again. Nathan, if there's anything else going on, if you need to talk to someone, I can recommend a few counselors who specialize in postpartum issues. The implication hung between us. Postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis. Was that what this was? Had Melissa's brain chemistry gone haywire, convincing her of an impossible betrayal? That night, after Lily was asleep in her crib, I tried to talk to Melissa about seeing someone. We were sitting on opposite ends of our gray sectional couch, the TV playing some cooking show neither of us was watching. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Chen about how you're feeling, I suggested gently. A lot of new mothers go through anxiety. It's completely normal. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with you. Melissa's head snapped toward me, her eyes sharp. I'm not crazy, Nathan. The word crazy landed like a slap. I never said you were. I just think maybe the stress and sleep deprivation might be affecting your perspective. Because, Melissa, I've never cheated on you. Not once. Not ever. I don't even look at other women. You're it for me. You and Lily. I was trying to be reassuring, but her expression didn't soften. If anything, she looked more resolved. Then you won't mind taking the test, she said. It wasn't a question. I felt my patience fraying. Of course I don't mind. I already set it up. We can go Friday. But I need you to understand that this is going to show exactly what I've been telling you. Lily is my daughter. And when it does, I need you to promise you'll talk to someone about why you convinced yourself otherwise. Melissa agreed, but there was something in her eyes that made me uneasy. A calculation. Like she was 3 moves ahead in a game I didn't know we were playing. Friday came, and we drove to the testing facility in silence. It was a nondescript medical building in Skokie, the kind of place that handles everything from drug screenings to immigration physicals. The technician who performed the swabs was a woman named Patricia Kowalski, according to her name tag. She was brisk and professional, explaining the chain of custody procedures, how the samples would be processed, when we could expect results. She swabbed the inside of my cheek, then Melissa's, then carefully collected cells from inside Lily's tiny mouth while she squirmed and fussed. The whole process took maybe 15 minutes. As we walked back to our car, I tried to take Melissa's hand, but she pulled away, pretending to adjust her purse. That small rejection hurt more than I wanted to admit. The waiting was torture. Not because I doubted the results, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally broken in my marriage. Melissa had essentially accused me of infidelity, of being the kind of man who would lie and deceive her about something as sacred as our child. What did that say about how she saw me? About the foundation of our relationship? I threw myself into work, spending long hours at the office reviewing contracts and site plans for a new mixed-use development downtown. My colleague, David Huang, noticed I was off. We'd been friends since I started at the firm 8 years ago, and he could read me better than most. You look like hell, he said bluntly one afternoon, appearing in my office doorway with 2 cups of coffee. What's going on? I hadn't told anyone about the paternity test. It felt too humiliating, too raw. But David had 3 kids of his own, and something about his straightforward concern made me crack. I told him everything. David listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. When I finished, he set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. Nathan, I'm going to say something, and I need you to really hear me. His voice was serious in a way I'd rarely heard. In my experience, when someone accuses their partner of cheating out of nowhere, especially something this specific, it's usually projection. The word hit me like cold water. Projection. As in, the guilty party accusing the innocent one to deflect from their own guilt. You think Melissa cheated? I said slowly, testing the words. They felt foreign in my mouth. David spread his hands. I don't know your wife well enough to say for sure, but demanding a paternity test when you've given her 0 reason to doubt you? That's not normal anxiety, Nathan. That's someone trying to ease their own conscience or set up a narrative. I shook my head, rejecting the idea even as a small, traitorous part of my brain started connecting dots I'd been ignoring. Melissa's increased hours at work over the past year, the new password on her phone, the way she'd started going to yoga classes 3 times a week, but never seemed more relaxed. I spent the weekend watching my wife with new eyes, hating myself for it. Was she checking her phone more than usual? Yes, but she'd always been attached to her device for work. Did she seem distant? Maybe, but she was also exhausted from caring for a newborn. Was she defensive when I asked innocent questions about her day? Sometimes, but wasn't everyone entitled to privacy? I was spiraling, constructing a paranoid fantasy out of circumstantial evidence and my colleagues' speculation. I refused to become that husband, the one who tracked his wife's movements and checked her email. If Melissa had cheated, the paternity test would reveal it. If she hadn't, then we needed to figure out what was causing this delusion and fix it. Either way, I had to wait for the results. They arrived on a Wednesday morning, exactly 1 week after we'd submitted the samples. I was at work when the email came through, marked confidential, DNA test results. My hands shook as I opened the attachment. The document was clinical, full of technical terminology about genetic markers and allele matching. But the conclusion was clear, printed in bold at the bottom of the second page. The probability of paternity is 99.99%. Nathan Michael Dawson cannot be excluded as the biological father of Lily Ann Dawson. I read it 3 times, feeling a complicated mix of relief and rage. Relief that my daughter was mine, confirmed beyond any doubt. Rage that I'd been put through this humiliating process in the first place. I called Melissa immediately. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carefully neutral. "Did you get the results?" she asked. "Yes," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "Lily's mine, exactly like I told you she would be." There was a long silence on the other end, too long. "Melissa?" I prompted. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller. "Nathan, I need to tell you something. Can you come home?" The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "What's going on?" I demanded. "Not over the phone," she said. "Please, just come home." She hung up before I could respond. I drove home doing 15 over the speed limit, my mind racing through possibilities. Was she sick? Was something wrong with Lily? Had something happened at her work? I burst through our front door at 1:30 in the afternoon to find Melissa sitting at the dining room table, her laptop open in front of her. Lily was napping upstairs. I could hear the white noise machine humming through the baby monitor. Melissa looked up at me, and I was shocked to see tears streaming down her face. Not delicate crying, ugly gasping sobs that shook her whole body. I'd seen my wife cry exactly 3 times in 5 years of marriage, at our wedding, when her grandmother died, and when Lily was born. This was different. This was devastation. "What happened?" I asked, moving toward her. She held up a hand, stopping me. "Don't," she choked out. "Don't come closer. Not yet." That's when I noticed the papers spread across the table. Medical documents, lab reports, and another DNA test result. But this one had different names. My confusion must have shown on my face because Melissa laughed bitterly through her tears. "I took a DNA test too," she said. "A different kind, through one of those ancestry websites. I did it a month ago because my mother kept talking about wanting to trace our family tree." She pushed the laptop toward me, turning it so I could see the screen. It showed a genealogy website, the kind that promises to connect you with distant relatives and reveal your ethnic background. But what I was seeing didn't make sense. According to the results, Melissa was 50% matched to someone named Caroline Brennan. Parent/child relationship, the website indicated. "I don't understand," I said slowly. Melissa wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "Neither did I. So I contacted Caroline. She lives in Portland. She's 53 years old. And Nathan, she's my biological mother." The words hung in the air between us. I pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "Your mother is Diane Remington," I said stupidly, stating the obvious. Melissa had grown up in Lake Forest, raised by Diane and Robert Remington, a lawyer and a dermatologist respectively. Upper middle class, stable, involved parents who doted on their only child. "Apparently not," Melissa said, her voice hollow. "Caroline got pregnant at 19. She was in college, not ready to be a mother. She gave me up for adoption through a private agency. The Remingtons adopted me when I was 3 days old. They never told me." The revelation was staggering, but I still didn't understand what it had to do with the paternity test. Melissa must have seen my confusion because she pulled up another document on her laptop. When I connected with Caroline, she sent me my original birth certificate, the one from before the adoption. And Nathan, it lists my biological father. She turned the laptop again, pointing to a name I didn't recognize. "Richard Caldwell." My stomach lurched. "Who is Richard Caldwell?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be bad. Melissa's face crumpled. "He's your father's business partner. He's Uncle Rick. He's the man who gave the toast at our wedding. He's the godfather to our daughter." The room started spinning. Richard Caldwell. Rick. The man I'd called Uncle Rick since I was 8 years old, when he and my father had started their real estate development firm together. The man who'd taught me to play golf, who'd written me a recommendation letter for college, who'd held Lily at her baptism and promised to guide her through life. "That's impossible," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I was doing the math. Rick was in his mid-70s now. 19-year-old Caroline getting pregnant would have been 53 years ago, which put Rick in his early 20s. The timeline worked. "I called Caroline after I got the DNA results," Melissa continued, her voice mechanical now, like she'd retreated somewhere safe inside her head. "She confirmed it. She had a brief relationship with Rick in college, University of Oregon. When she got pregnant, he'd just graduated and was moving to Illinois for business school. He gave her $5,000 for an abortion. She took the money but couldn't go through with it. She had me, gave me up, and never contacted him again. He doesn't know I exist." I was trying to process this, trying to understand the implications, but my brain kept snagging on one horrifying fact. "Melissa," I said carefully, "if Rick is your biological father and my dad is his business partner—" I couldn't finish the sentence. Melissa nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "We're not related by blood," she said quickly. "I checked. Rick and your father aren't actually related. You call him Uncle Rick because they're close friends, not because he's family. But Nathan, do you understand what this means? I understood. I understood perfectly. My wife's biological father was the man who'd been a fixture in my life for 2 decades, the man who'd invested in my first real estate deal, the man who currently held 20% equity in a property I was developing, the man whose wife, Linda, had thrown Melissa's baby shower. Lily's godfather was actually her biological grandfather. The family tree we'd carefully constructed was a lie. But there was still one piece I didn't understand. Why did you ask for the paternity test? I asked. If you were worried about the adoption, about your genetics, why make it about me? Melissa buried her face in her hands. Because I panicked, she said, her voice muffled. When I got the ancestry results, when I saw that Caroline was my mother, I started spiraling. I kept thinking about hereditary diseases, about what other secrets might be hiding in my genetics. And then I started thinking about Lily, about what if there was something wrong with her because of my DNA? What if I'd passed something on that could hurt her? She looked up at me, her eyes red and desperate. I convinced myself that if you were the father, at least half of her genetics were sound. At least half of her came from a stable, known family line. It was irrational. I know it was irrational, but I couldn't stop thinking it. So you decided to torture me instead, I said, and I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. You made me think you were accusing me of cheating, that you thought I'd betray you, when really you were just having an identity crisis. It sounded harsh, but it was true. Melissa flinched. I know. I'm sorry. I handled it wrong. I handled everything wrong. But Nathan, we have a bigger problem now. She pulled up another document. This one, a medical history questionnaire she must have received from Caroline. My biological mother has a genetic condition, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, the hypermobile type. It causes joint problems, chronic pain, and it's hereditary. There's a 50% chance I have it. And if I have it, there's a 50% chance Lily has it. The medical implications started cascading through my mind. Ehlers-Danlos could range from mild to severe. It could mean a lifetime of physical therapy, pain management, potential complications with future pregnancies. But it was also manageable, treatable, not the disaster Melissa seemed to think it was. We'll get you tested, I said, forcing myself to focus on the practical. And if you have it, we'll get Lily tested. We'll deal with whatever comes. But Melissa was shaking her head. There's more. Caroline said Richard Caldwell has a family history of early-onset Alzheimer's. His mother had it. His sister has it. He's 74 and showing early signs. The weight of this information settled over me like a heavy blanket. Rick had been more forgetful lately, I'd noticed it. Misplaced keys, repeated stories, confusion about dates. We'd chalked it up to normal aging, but what if it wasn't? And what did it mean for Melissa, who carried half his DNA? What did it mean for Lily? I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw the terror beneath the tears. She wasn't just dealing with the shock of finding out she was adopted. She was dealing with the genetic time bomb that might be ticking inside her body, inside our daughter's body, and she'd tried to process it alone, in the most backwards, hurtful way possible. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked, the anger draining out of me, replaced by exhaustion. Why put us both through the paternity test charade instead of just explaining what was happening? Melissa's laugh was bitter and broken. Because I didn't know how to say it. How do you tell your husband that the man who's been like a second father to him is actually your biological father? That our daughter's godfather is her grandfather? That our entire family structure is built on a secret adoption no one told me about? She had a point. This wasn't exactly a conversation you could ease into. And I was scared, she continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Scared you'd look at me differently. Scared you'd see me as damaged goods, genetics from a woman who gave me away, and a man who paid for an abortion. Scared you'd regret marrying me, having a child with me. The vulnerability in her admission cracked something open in my chest. I moved around the table and pulled her into my arms. She collapsed against me, sobbing into my shoulder the way she hadn't allowed herself to do in weeks. I could never regret you, I said into her hair. Never regret Lily. But Melissa, you have to promise me you'll never shut me out like this again. We're partners. Whatever comes, we face it together. She nodded against my chest, clinging to me like I was the only solid thing in a world that had turned liquid and unstable. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking through everything. Caroline had sent Melissa her full medical history, detailed and thorough. Along with the Ehlers-Danlos and the Alzheimer's concern, there were a few other minor issues. A tendency toward high blood pressure, some vitamin deficiencies, nothing catastrophic. Caroline had also shared photos of herself at various ages, and seeing them was surreal. Young Caroline looked exactly like Melissa. Same sharp cheekbones, same wide-set eyes, same slightly crooked smile. Seeing my wife's face reflected in a stranger's photographs drove home the reality of the situation in a way the paperwork couldn't. This woman, Caroline Brennan, had carried Melissa for 9 months, given birth to her, and then handed her to strangers. I couldn't imagine doing that with Lily. I couldn't imagine a circumstance where I'd willingly give her away. But I also wasn't a 19-year-old college student with no support system, and a boyfriend who'd literally paid to make the problem disappear. I tried to reserve judgment. Have you told your parents? I asked. Melissa shook her head. I don't know how. They lied to me my entire life, Nathan. 32 years of pretending I was their biological child. How do I even begin that conversation? It was a fair question, and one I didn't have a good answer for. Maybe start with asking them why they never told you, I suggested. They must have had a reason. Maybe they were planning to tell you and never found the right time. Maybe they thought it would be easier if you never knew. Melissa laughed bitterly. Well, it wasn't easier. It was a bomb waiting to go off, and now it's exploded all over our lives. She wasn't wrong, but we couldn't unring this bell. The information existed now, and we had to decide what to do with it. The question of whether to tell Rick was the elephant in the room. Rick Caldwell, successful developer, devoted husband to Linda for 48 years, father to 3 children, grandfather to 7. What would this information do to him? What would it do to his family? What would it do to my relationship with my own father, whose business and friendship with Rick went back decades? We have to tell him, Melissa said, though she didn't sound happy about it. He has a daughter he doesn't know about. That's not information we can keep from him. Part of me wanted to argue, to protect Rick from this upheaval, but I knew she was right. Beyond the moral obligation, there were practical concerns. If Rick was showing signs of Alzheimer's, if it was genetic, Melissa needed to know her risk factors. She needed his full medical history for herself and for Lily. We needed information that only Rick could provide. We'll tell him together, I decided. But let's talk to your parents first. Get their side of the story. Then we'll figure out the best way to approach Rick. Melissa agreed, though I could see the dread in her eyes. This conversation was going to shatter people. There was no way around it. We decided to drive to Lake Forest that evening, to confront Diane and Robert Remington with the truth their daughter had uncovered. Melissa called ahead, telling her mother we needed to talk about something urgent. Diane sounded worried but agreed to have us over after dinner. The drive to Lake Forest took 40 minutes, and we spent it in tense silence. Lily slept in her car seat, oblivious to the family drama unfolding around her. I kept glancing at Melissa, watching her hands twist in her lap, her jaw clenched so tight I worried she'd crack a tooth. When we pulled up to the Remington house, a stately brick colonial in an old-money neighborhood, my stomach was churning. I'd always liked Melissa's parents. Diane was warm and gracious, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and hosted elaborate holiday dinners. Robert was quieter, more reserved, but kind in his own way. The idea that they'd been hiding something this fundamental from their daughter felt incompatible with the people I thought I knew. They greeted us at the door, concern evident on their faces. Is everything all right with the baby? Diane asked immediately, reaching for Lily. I handed over our daughter, and Diane cooed at her, checking her over with a grandmother's practiced eye. Lily's fine, Melissa said, her voice tight. Can we talk inside? We settled in the formal living room, a space normally reserved for holidays and special occasions. The incongruity of sitting on the cream-colored furniture discussing secrets and lies while Diane bounced Lily on her knee was jarring. Melissa didn't waste time with small talk. She pulled out her laptop and showed them the Ancestry DNA results, the connection to Caroline Brennan, the documentation. I watched Robert's face drain of color. Diane's hands stilled on Lily's back, her expression freezing into something caught between shock and grief. How did you find out? Robert asked quietly, his lawyer's composure cracking. I took a DNA test for fun, Melissa said, and the bitter irony in her voice was thick. Thought I'd trace our family tree, maybe find some distant cousins. Instead, I found my biological mother. Want to explain why I had to learn about my adoption from a stranger on the internet? Diane's eyes filled with tears. We were going to tell you, she whispered. We always planned to tell you. When? Melissa demanded. When I was 30? 40? When I had kids of my own? Oh wait, that already happened, and you still said nothing. Robert leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. Melissa, please try to understand. When we adopted you, the agency recommended that we raise you as our biological child. This was 1993, and the prevailing wisdom at the time was that telling children about adoption could create identity issues, could make them feel like they didn't fully belong. He ran a hand through his graying hair. We were young, first-time parents, desperate for a child after years of infertility. We followed the guidance we were given, and then years passed, and you were so happy, so well-adjusted. We kept telling ourselves we'd bring it up when the time was right, but there never seemed to be a right time. Diane was openly crying now, carefully passing Lily to me so she wouldn't upset the baby. We loved you so much, she said. From the moment they placed you in my arms, you were my daughter. Not adopted, not someone else's, mine. I didn't want you to ever feel like you were anything less than completely, wholly our child. The pain in her voice was genuine, and despite my anger on Melissa's behalf, I could see the impossible position they'd been in. Tell the truth and risk making their daughter feel like an outsider in her own family, or keep the secret and hope it never came to light. Did you know about Richard Caldwell? Melissa asked, her voice cracking. Did you know my biological father was Rick? Diane and Robert exchanged glances, and I knew the answer before they spoke. We knew, Robert admitted. The adoption agency gave us the basic information. The mother was a college student from Oregon. The father was Richard Caldwell, a recent graduate who'd moved to Illinois. We didn't think anything of it at the time. Caldwell is a common enough name. He paused, swallowing hard. It wasn't until years later, when you started dating Nathan, when we met his family and Rick Caldwell was there, that we made the connection. We looked up his age, his education history. University of Oregon, right time frame. It had to be him. Melissa looked like she'd been slapped. You knew, she repeated. You knew when I started dating Nathan that his family friend was my biological father, and you said nothing? What would you have had us say? Diane asked desperately. That the man who was essentially Nathan's uncle was actually your father? That you were genetically connected to your boyfriend's family in this bizarre, twisted way? How would that have helped anyone? It would have given me the truth, Melissa shouted, making Lily startle in my arms. I rocked her gently, murmuring soothing sounds while my wife fell apart. It would have let me make informed decisions about my life, my health, my family. Did you know about the Ehlers-Danlos, the Alzheimer's? Did you know what genetic legacy I might be passing on to my daughter? Diane shook her head frantically. We didn't know about any medical conditions. The adoption file didn't include detailed medical history beyond basic health screening. Melissa, if we'd known there were serious genetic concerns, we would have told you, I swear. Robert stood, pacing to the window. We made a mistake, he said, his back to us. We kept making the same mistake year after year, and now it's blown up in our faces. We can't take it back. All we can do is apologize and try to move forward. He turned to face Melissa. You're my daughter. That will never change. But I understand if you need time to process this, to figure out what our relationship looks like now. Melissa was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. I don't know where I come from. Everything I thought I knew about my identity, my family, my history, it's all a lie. I shifted Lily to one arm and reached for Melissa's hand with the other. You're the same person you were yesterday, I said firmly. You're my wife, Lily's mother, a brilliant marketing director who once convinced a pharma company to completely rebrand their flagship product. You're the woman who ugly cries at dog adoption commercials and makes killer lasagna from scratch. None of that changes because of some DNA. It was what she needed to hear, and I watched some of the panic recede from her eyes. We stayed at her parents' house for another 2 hours, talking through the implications, the next steps. Diane and Robert were devastated but cooperative. They gave Melissa all the adoption paperwork they had, including the original agency file with Caroline's information. They answered every question as honestly as they could. By the time we left, there was a fragile understanding between them. The relationship was damaged, maybe permanently, but not destroyed. That night, after Lily was asleep and we were lying in bed in the dark, Melissa spoke into the silence. We have to tell Rick tomorrow, she said. I can't carry this secret any longer. I agreed, though the thought of that conversation made me want to crawl out of my skin. Rick Caldwell, the man who'd been at every major milestone of my life. How do you tell someone they have a secret daughter? How do you shatter someone's understanding of their past at age 74? I called Rick the next morning and asked if I could stop by his office. He agreed immediately, probably assuming I wanted to discuss the Riverside development project we were working on together. I didn't tell him Melissa was coming too. When we walked into Rick's office at 11 in the morning on Thursday, he was on the phone but waved us in cheerfully, gesturing to the leather chairs across from his massive oak desk. He wrapped up his call quickly, standing to greet us with his usual warmth. Nathan, Melissa, what a nice surprise. How's my beautiful goddaughter? He meant Lily, and the word goddaughter took on a new, painful meaning. She's good, I managed. Growing fast. Rick, we need to talk to you about something. It's important. Something in my tone made his smile fade. He sat back down slowly, his hands folding on the desk in front of him. What's going on? Is someone sick? Melissa pulled out her laptop, and for the third time in 24 hours, we walked through the DNA results, the connection to Caroline Brennan, the trail of evidence that led back to Rick. I watched his face as comprehension dawned. Confusion gave way to shock, then to something like horror. Caroline? He repeated, his voice hoarse. Caroline Brennan from University of Oregon? Melissa nodded. She said you had a relationship in college, spring of your senior year. She got pregnant, you gave her money for an abortion, and then you moved to Illinois. Rick's face had gone pale. He stood abruptly, walked to the window, his hands shaking. I remember Caroline, he said quietly. We dated for about 3 months. She was a sophomore studying psychology. Sweet girl, very bright. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I was 22 years old, about to start business school halfway across the country. I gave her the money and left. I never asked what happened. I just assumed. He trailed off, turning back to face us. She had the baby, Melissa said. She had me. She gave me up for adoption. I was raised by Diane and Robert Remington in Lake Forest. I've lived my entire life less than an hour away from you, and we never knew. The implications settled over the room like fallout. Rick lowered himself back into his chair, looking every one of his 74 years. "You're my daughter," he said wonderingly, studying Melissa's face. "I have a daughter." Then his eyes shifted to me, and I saw him do the same math I'd done. "And you married Nathan. My goddaughter is actually my granddaughter." He laughed, but it was a broken sound. "God, what a mess." "It gets more complicated," I said. "Melissa found you through genetic testing because she was worried about hereditary conditions. Caroline told her about the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in her family, and about the Alzheimer's in yours." Rick's expression shuddered. "Who told you about the Alzheimer's?" he asked carefully. "Caroline said your mother had it. Your sister has it. She said you're showing early signs." It was a guess, based on what Melissa had told me and what I'd observed, but Rick didn't deny it. He sighed heavily, suddenly looking exhausted. "I was diagnosed 6 months ago," he admitted. "Early onset familial Alzheimer's. It's genetic, autosomal dominant. 50% chance I'd develop it. 50% chance each of my kids would develop it." He looked at Melissa. "And now 50% chance you'll develop it." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Melissa's hand found mine and squeezed so hard it hurt. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rick shrugged, trying for nonchalance and failing. "I'm on medication that's slowing the progression. I'm still functional, still working, still myself most days. But there are moments. Lost time, confusion, words that won't come when I need them. It's going to get worse. We know that." He met Melissa's eyes. "I'm sorry. If I'd known about you, I would have warned you before you had children. You deserved to make an informed choice." "I don't regret Lily," Melissa said fiercely. "I could never regret her. But I need to know everything. Every detail of your family's medical history. Every symptom. Every progression marker. I need to know what I'm facing. What she might be facing." Rick nodded. "I'll give you everything I have. Medical records, genetic testing results, all of it. And Melissa?" He paused, emotion cracking his voice. "I know this isn't how either of us wanted to meet, but if you'll let me, I'd like to get to know you. As my daughter, not just Nathan's wife." Melissa started crying again, and Rick came around the desk to embrace her awkwardly. It was strange watching them, seeing the physical similarities I'd never noticed before. They had the same hands, long-fingered and elegant, the same way of tilting their heads when considering something, genetics revealing themselves in subtle ways. After a moment, Rick pulled back. "Does Linda know?" he asked me, referring to his wife. "Not yet," I said. "We wanted to tell you first." Rick nodded slowly. "This is going to destroy her," he said quietly. 48 years of marriage, and I've never kept a secret from her. Now I have to tell her I had a child with another woman before we even met, and that child is married to the son of my business partner. It's like a bad soap opera." He wasn't wrong. "Your kids need to know too," Melissa said. "About me, about the Alzheimer's risk. If it's 50% for each of them, they deserve to know what they're potentially facing." Rick looked pained. "They already know about the Alzheimer's. I told them after my diagnosis. But telling them about you, about having a sister they never knew about, that's going to be complicated." We spent the next 2 hours in Rick's office, going through everything. He called his neurologist and authorized him to share all his medical records with Melissa. He pulled up his genetic testing results and explained what the markers meant, what the progression timeline typically looked like. He showed us photos of his mother in her final years, when the Alzheimer's had robbed her of language and memory and dignity. It was brutal, clinical, and necessary. Melissa needed to know what she might be facing. By the time we left Rick's office, we had a plan. Rick would tell Linda and his children. Melissa would schedule genetic testing for herself to determine if she'd inherited the Alzheimer's mutation. We'd get Lily tested for Ehlers-Danlos once she was old enough for the tests to be reliable, and we'd figure out how to navigate this new, strange family configuration we'd found ourselves in. But first, we had to deal with the social fallout. Rick insisted on telling my father, Jason Dawson, himself. They'd been partners for 26 years, friends even longer. The revelation that Rick's secret daughter was married to Jason's son was going to complicate their business relationship in ways we couldn't fully predict. Rick called my dad that afternoon and asked him to come to the office. I stayed, partly to support Rick, partly because I needed to see my father's reaction. Dad arrived 20 minutes later, his expression concerned. "What's wrong? Is it the Alzheimer's?" he asked immediately, looking between Rick and me. "Has something changed?" Rick shook his head. "The Alzheimer's is the same, but something else has come up, something I need to tell you about." He walked Dad through the same story we'd explained to him hours earlier. I watched my father's face cycle through confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally a kind of stunned acceptance. "Let me make sure I understand this," Dad said slowly. "You had a relationship in college that resulted in a pregnancy. The woman gave the baby up for adoption. That baby was Melissa Remington, who is now married to my son, making your biological daughter my daughter-in-law, and your granddaughter my granddaughter." He paused. "Rick, this is insane." "I know," Rick said miserably. Believe me, I know. Dad turned to me. How are you handling this? He asked. Finding out your wife is genetically related to our business partner? We're not blood related, I said, echoing what Melissa had told me. Rick isn't actually family, just a close friend who we called Uncle. So Melissa and I are fine, legally and genetically. It's just weird. Weird felt like an understatement, but I didn't have a better word. Dad nodded slowly. And the Alzheimer's risk? Melissa needs to get tested? She's scheduling an appointment with a genetic counselor next week, I confirmed. We'll know more after that. Dad looked at Rick with something like pity. You've had a hell of a year, my friend. First the diagnosis, now this. How are you holding up? Rick's laugh was bitter. I've been better. I'm 74 years old, losing my memory, and just found out I have a daughter I never knew about. Linda is going to be devastated. My kids are going to feel betrayed. And all of this is happening because I was a careless 22-year-old who couldn't be bothered to follow up with the girlfriend I got pregnant. The self-recrimination in his voice was harsh. You were a kid, Dad said. You made a mistake. You can't change that now. All you can do is move forward and try to build something with Melissa. The next few weeks were a blur of difficult conversations and emotional reckonings. Rick told Linda, who cried for 2 days straight before pulling herself together and inviting Melissa to lunch. Their meeting was awkward, but not hostile. Linda was gracious in a way that seemed almost superhuman. Rick told his 3 children, David, Allison, and Christopher. Their reactions ranged from shock to anger to cautious curiosity. Allison, the youngest at 42, was the most welcoming, immediately reaching out to Melissa via email and suggesting they meet for coffee. David and Christopher were more reserved, protective of their mother, and suspicious of this new sister who'd appeared out of nowhere. Melissa underwent genetic testing for the Alzheimer's mutation. The wait for those results was excruciating, worse even than the paternity test had been. This time, the stakes were so much higher. A positive result would mean Melissa had a 50% chance of developing Alzheimer's, probably in her 50s or 60s. It would mean difficult decisions about her career, her future, her quality of life. It would mean Lily might have to watch her mother deteriorate the same way Rick's children were watching him. When the results came back negative, we both cried with relief. Melissa had somehow won the genetic lottery. She'd dodged the Alzheimer's bullet, at least from Rick's side. But the Ehlers-Danlos was still a concern. Melissa made an appointment with a rheumatologist who specialized in connective tissue disorders. After a thorough examination and genetic testing, the diagnosis came back. Hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, moderate severity. It explained some things Melissa had experienced throughout her life. The joint pain she'd attributed to sports injuries, the skin that bruised easily, the occasional dislocations. None of it had been serious enough to trigger concern before, but now we had a name for it, and a 50% chance that Lily had inherited it. We decided to wait until Lily was older before testing her. There was no treatment that would change in her infant years, and knowing seemed crueler than not knowing for now. If she started showing symptoms as she grew, we'd test her then. The whole situation had fundamentally changed our family structure. Lily now had 3 sets of grandparents, the Dawsons, the Remingtons, and the Caldwells. Rick had embraced his role as grandfather with surprising enthusiasm, buying out half a toy store and insisting on weekly visits. Linda was more reserved but kind, clearly trying to reconcile her feelings about her husband's past with her desire to know her unexpected granddaughter. The Remingtons were struggling. Melissa's relationship with them remained strained, polite, but distant. They'd broken her trust in a fundamental way, and rebuilding that was going to take time, maybe years, maybe never. But they were trying, and Melissa was willing to engage with them, which was something. Caroline Brennan flew in from Portland 6 weeks after the initial revelation. Meeting her biological mother was surreal for Melissa. They looked almost identical, moved the same way, had the same verbal tics. But they were strangers, separated by 32 years and completely different lives. Caroline was married to a high school teacher, had 2 sons in their 20s, worked as a therapist. She'd built a good life after giving up Melissa, but the guilt and grief of that decision had never fully left her. Their first meeting was at our house, and I watched from the kitchen as they sat in the living room, circling each other verbally, trying to find common ground. By the end of the afternoon, they'd exchanged numbers and made tentative plans to stay in touch. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion, but it was real and honest, which mattered more. The most unexpected consequence of all this was how it changed my relationship with Rick. Before, he'd been a mentor, a father figure, someone I looked up to professionally and personally. Now, he was my father-in-law, my daughter's grandfather. The dynamic had shifted in ways I was still processing, but it had also deepened our connection. Rick started sharing things with me he'd never discussed before, his fears about the Alzheimer's, his regrets about Caroline, his gratitude that Melissa had come into his life, even under these bizarre circumstances. We'd always been close, but this made us family in a way that went beyond business partnerships and professional respect. 6 months after the DNA test that started everything, Melissa and I were sitting in our backyard watching Lily attempt to crawl on a blanket. She was almost 9 months old now, babbling and giggling, completely oblivious to the family drama that had swirled around her birth. "Do you regret asking for the paternity test?" I asked Melissa. It was the first time I'd brought it up since everything had been revealed. She considered the question seriously. "I regret hurting you," she said finally. "I regret making you think I didn't trust you. But if I hadn't gotten curious about my genetics, if I hadn't taken that ancestry test, we might never have found out the truth. I'd still think I was Diane and Robert's biological child. Rick would never have known he had a daughter. Lily would have grown up not knowing her genetic grandfather." She paused, watching our daughter grab at a blade of grass. "So no, I don't regret the journey, even if the beginning was messy." I understood what she meant. The truth had been painful, but it had also been necessary. We now had information about Melissa's health risks, about Lily's potential genetic challenges. We had a bigger, stranger family than we'd started with, but more people who loved our daughter. And we had honesty, finally, after decades of secrets and half-truths. "What about us?" I asked. "Are we okay?" Melissa turned to look at me, and I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with in college, but also someone new. Someone who'd been forged in the fire of identity crisis and genetic revelation and come out stronger. "We're more than okay," she said. "You stood by me through the worst of it. You didn't flinch when I fell apart. That's worth everything." Lily chose that moment to successfully execute her first real crawl, moving forward about 6 inches before collapsing in a heap of triumphant giggles. Melissa and I both cheered, celebrating this milestone the way we'd celebrated every tiny achievement. Because that's what parents do. We show up, we support, we love unconditionally regardless of what DNA tests or ancestry websites reveal. Later that night, after Lily was asleep and we were getting ready for bed, Melissa showed me an email on her phone. It was from Allison Caldwell, Rick's youngest daughter. "Read this," Melissa said, handing me the phone. The email was warm and welcoming, suggesting that Melissa, Allison, and Rick's other daughter attend a pottery class together. "Sister bonding," Allison had called it, with a smiley face emoji. "She wants to get to know me," Melissa said, wonder in her voice. "She's not angry or resentful. She actually wants me in her life." I kissed the top of my wife's head. "You're easy to love," I said simply. "She's going to figure that out." As I turned off the light and settled into bed next to Melissa, I thought about how drastically our lives had changed in 6 months. We'd started the year as a normal couple with a new baby, navigating the usual challenges of parenthood and sleep deprivation. Now we were at the center of a genetic mystery that had rewritten multiple family trees and exposed secrets decades in the making. But through all of it, the core had remained solid. Melissa and I. Our marriage. Our daughter. The DNA test that was supposed to prove paternity had instead proved something more important. That family is more than genetics, that truth is worth the pain it causes, and that love can survive even the most impossible revelations. In the darkness, I heard Melissa's breathing even out as she fell asleep. I stayed awake a while longer, listening to Lily's soft snores through the baby monitor, thinking about the strange and winding path that had brought us to this moment. A path that started with a desperate wife's irrational demand and ended with a family tree no one could have predicted. And I realized I wouldn't change any of it. Not the pain, not the confusion, not the difficult conversations or the genetic testing or the awkward family gatherings. Because all of it had led us here, to truth and understanding and a future built on honesty rather than comfortable lies. The DNA test had exposed Melissa's secret, but in doing so, it had also set us all free. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.